At a dinner meant to celebrate his college acceptance, my son called me his biggest burden. He thought the words would free him, that he could shed his modest mother and step into the wealthy world of his new girlfriend. He saw the massive college fund I built for him as his birthright, a simple transaction he was entitled to. He didn't realize that for 20 years I wasn't just his mother. I was his archivist, his banker, and the sole trustee of his destiny. He thought he was closing the chapter on me. I simply closed his account. Before I begin, I want you to know that for 35 years, my life's work was preservation. As the head archivist at the Robert W. Woodruff Library at Clark Atlanta University, I was a keeper of records, a custodian of legacies. My world was one of acid-free paper, climate-controlled vaults, and the quiet, sacred duty of carrying the past forward so that the future could have a place to stand. I have held in my gloved hands the letters of activists, the first draft manuscripts of great thinkers, the fragile photographs that document the long, arduous, and beautiful march of our people. I understand in my bones the weight of a foundation. I know what it takes to build one, to protect it from the slow, insidious decay of time and neglect. I believe that a life, like a historical collection, is measured by the legacy it leaves behind. My son, Andre, was meant to be my greatest collection, my most precious and meticulously curated legacy. Then one evening at an absurdly expensive steakhouse in Buckhead, a place so loud with the sound of its own importance that you could barely hear yourself think, he called me his biggest burden. He said it in front of his new shiny girlfriend, a girl whose eyes passed over me with the same casual disinterest one might afford a faded photograph just before tossing it into the trash. He didn't know that an archivist's job isn't just to preserve, it's also to deaccession. It is a formal clinical term for a painful but necessary process. To officially remove an item from a collection when it has been damaged beyond repair, when its presence compromises the integrity of the whole. He thought he was starting his new life that night, stepping onto a grand stage of his own making. I made sure he started it with nothing but the clothes on his back and the bill for the dinner he had just eaten. My name is Vivian Dubois, and for most of my 62 years I was a mother first. It was a title I wore with more pride than my professional credentials, a role I inhabited so completely that I had forgotten where it ended and I began. This is the story of the day I remembered. This is the story of the day I decided to be myself first, and in doing so, to deaccession the most important file of my life. To understand the weight of that evening, you must first understand the weight of the years that preceded it. An archivist does not simply look at an object. She sees its provenance, the entire chain of custody and history that gives it meaning. The story of Andre's betrayal does not begin with the cutting words spoken over a slab of overpriced beef. It begins 2 decades earlier with a promise whispered over a hospital bed. My husband, David, was a man who believed in foundations. He was a professor of sociology at Morehouse, a man who saw the world in systems, structures, and the powerful, invisible currents that shape human lives. He knew that for a young black man in America, the surest foundation one could provide was the absolute, unequivocal promise of education. It was not just a path to a career. It was armor. It was a passport. It was a declaration of worth in a world that would constantly seek to devalue you. When the cancer took him from me, swiftly and cruelly, his last coherent words to me were not of love, though our love was a vast and settled thing. They were of our son. "The fund, Viv," he had whispered, his hand cool in mine. "Don't let anything touch the fund. Give the boy a foundation I can't be here to build." And so, the promise became my solitary mission. The Andre Dubois Collegiate Trust was not merely a bank account. It was a living memorial, a continuation of my husband's will. It was the place I poured my grief, my love, my hope, and every spare dollar that passed through my hands. For 20 years I became a master of the art of doing without. My life, once a duet of shared dreams and comfortable middle-class ambitions, became a solo performance of radical frugality. I was not poor. I was a woman with a singular, all-consuming purpose. That purpose shaped the very contours of my existence. It was in the worn upholstery of the 15-year-old Honda I drove to work each day, its engine rattling a familiar, reliable rhythm. It was in the calloused skin of my palms from the hours spent in my garden in our quiet Cascade Heights bungalow, a garden that provided not just solace, but a significant portion of my groceries. My vacations were not to sandy beaches or foreign cities. They were trips to the public library, journeys through the pages of books that cost me nothing but time. My colleagues at the university, bless their hearts, would often try to coax me out. "Vivian, we're all going down to Pascal's for lunch, come on with us." I would always smile and decline, unwrapping the simple turkey sandwich on wheat bread that I had packed from home. "You go on and have a good time," I'd say, the unspoken truth hanging in the air. A $15 lunch was 3 days of interest in Andre's account. It was another brick in the cathedral I was building for him, a structure of sacrifice and devotion that I believed would one day house his brightest future. I never felt deprived. Every dollar I saved, every small luxury I denied myself was an act of love. It was a conversation with my late husband, a reaffirmation of our shared vow. I was the archivist of our promise, and the collection was growing, flourishing under my meticulous, unwavering care. The quarterly statements from the investment firm were my love letters, each upward trend a whisper of encouragement, a sign that our foundation was strong, solid, and ready for the day my son would need it to build his own life upon. I was preserving his future, and in doing so I believed I was preserving the best part of my husband and of myself. I had no idea that the greatest threat to the collection was not a market crash or a bad investment, but the beneficiary himself. I didn't know that some foundations are not meant to be built upon, but to be escaped from. The Andre Du Bois Collegiate Trust was born in the sterile, quiet office of a downtown financial planner a month after David's funeral. I sat across a large mahogany desk from a kind-faced woman named Nia Brooks, my cousin, who looked at me with a mixture of professional sympathy and familial concern. I brought with me David's life insurance payout, a sum that felt both monumental and insultingly small when measured against the man it represented. "I want to put it all away," I told her, my voice still hoarse from weeks of weeping. "I don't want to touch a penny of it. It's for Andre. For college. For whatever he needs to get started." Nia, ever the pragmatist, gently pushed back. "Vivian, you need to keep some for yourself. For emergencies. For a cushion." "No," I insisted, a resolve hardening in me that I hadn't felt since the diagnosis. "David and I had a cushion. We had our life. This is for the next one. This is for his." And so we began. Nia, with her charts and her knowledge of markets and trusts, designed the vessel. But I was the one who filled it drop by painstaking drop over the next 2 decades. The trust became the central organizing principle of my life. It was my religion. Every financial decision was filtered through its sacred lens. When the roof on the bungalow needed replacing, I didn't take out a loan that would incur interest and divert funds. I learned, through library books and online videos, how to patch the leaks myself, spending a sweltering July weekend on the top of my house with a bucket of tar and a trowel, my hands stained black for a week. The satisfaction of seeing the ceiling dry after the next rainstorm was more profound than any resort vacation could ever be. It was the feeling of victory. It was the sound of another $1,000 flowing unimpeded into the trust. My wardrobe became a time capsule. The sensible blouses and skirts I wore to the library were of a quality that lasts, and I made them last, mending seams and replacing buttons with the same patient skill I used to repair the torn spine of a 19th century book. Fashion was a frivolous language I had no interest in learning. My shoes were sturdy, comfortable, and worn until the soles were as thin as paper. I remember once my younger sister Denise, a woman who lived her life in a vibrant, unapologetic splash of color and style, took me aside. "Viv, honey, this has got to stop," she'd said, gesturing to my perfectly serviceable but admittedly dated winter coat. "You look like you're waiting for a bus in 1995. Let me take you shopping." My treat. I had hugged her, touched by her generosity, but refused. "It keeps me warm, Dee. That's all a coat needs to do." What I didn't say was that the $500 she would have spent on a new coat was the equivalent of a semester's worth of textbooks at a state university. How could I wrap myself in such an indulgence when Andre's future was still a blueprint? The trust was not a savings account. It was a living, breathing entity. I fed it, nurtured it, and watched it grow with a fierce, maternal pride. The quarterly statements that arrived in the mail were my report cards. I would open them with bated breath, my eyes scanning the columns of figures, the market gains, the dividends reinvested. I learned the language of finance, of compound interest and asset allocation, with the same scholarly intensity one had once applied to my master's thesis. I could tell you the difference between a growth stock and a value stock, the benefits of an ETF versus a mutual fund. This knowledge was my secret power, my hidden life. To the world, I was Vivian Dubois, the quiet archivist. But in the privacy of my own home, I was a warrior, a financial strategist waging a silent 20-year campaign for my son's liberation. The sacrifices were invisible to everyone but me. They were the taste of tap water instead of bottled, the hum of a window fan instead of central air conditioning in the sticky Atlanta summers, the careful planning of grocery trips around sales flyers. They were the hundreds of quiet, solitary evenings spent cataloging collections at the library for a little extra overtime pay, while other women my age were at dinner parties or on cruises. And Andre, my beautiful, brilliant son, was the beneficiary of this silent, all-encompassing effort. He never wanted for anything essential. He had good clothes, a full belly, and every educational tool he needed. He went to the best summer camps. Not the expensive, flashy ones, but the academic ones that would look good on a college application. His world was secure, stable, and utterly devoid of the knowledge of the immense, ongoing sacrifice that made it so. I thought this was a gift. I was insulating him from the harsh realities of financial struggle, allowing him the freedom to simply be a child, to focus on his studies and his dreams. I believed I was building him a launching pad. I had no idea he would come to see it as a cage and me as its warden. The cathedral of sacrifice was nearly complete. The spires were reaching towards the sky. The foundations were unshakable. The total sum had grown to a figure that made my hands tremble when I saw it in print. It was enough for any Ivy League school he could get into, with enough left over for a master's degree, a down payment on a home, a life. It was the culmination of 20 years of a widow's promise. It was my magnum opus. And like all great works of art, it was vulnerable. Not to the market, not to inflation, but to a simple, devastating failure of appreciation. The boy for whom the cathedral had been built had decided he would rather worship at a different altar, one of chrome and glass and easy money. And he was about to try and burn my cathedral to the ground. There were two Andres. There was the boy I raised, and there was the young man who sat across from me at that steakhouse. The transition from one to the other was so gradual at first I almost missed it. It was like the slow fading of an old document exposed to too much light, a subtle bleaching of character that you only notice when you compare it to an earlier, more vibrant version. The first Andre, the Andre of my heart, was a boy who smelled of library books and freshly cut grass. He was a child of quiet curiosity who would spend hours with me in the garden, his small hands carefully patting soil around a new tomato plant. He loved the stories behind the artifacts I sometimes brought home from the library. A photograph, a deaccessioned book, a program from a long-ago concert. "Who held this, Mama?" he would ask, his eyes wide with wonder. What were they thinking? He was a boy who understood the value of things that money could not buy. He was a boy who, when I would come home late and exhausted from an extra shift, would have a glass of iced tea waiting for me on the porch, his small face etched with a miniature version of his father's concern. "You work too hard, Mama," he'd say, his voice a solemn echo of David's. That was the boy for whom the trust was built. That was the son who was the living embodiment of my promise. The second Andre, the one who began to emerge in his senior year of high school, was a stranger to me. This Andre smelled of expensive, cloying cologne and carried himself with a brittle, unearned arrogance. His curiosity was no longer directed at the past, but at the price tags of the future. The change, I can pinpoint with an archivist's precision, began the day Tiffany King entered our lives. She was not the first girl Andre had dated, but she was the first to treat our home not as a welcoming space, but as a sociological exhibit to be studied with detached amusement. Tiffany's family had new money, the loud, insecure kind that comes from a chain of successful car dealerships. Her father's face was plastered on billboards all over I-285, grinning with a kind of aggressive bonhomie that set my teeth on edge. Tiffany had inherited his belief that net worth was synonymous with self-worth. The first time she came to our house in Cascade Heights, I saw my life through her eyes, and it was a profoundly unsettling experience. I had always seen our home as a sanctuary, a place of warmth, history, and love. It was filled with David's books, with furniture we had chosen together, with the comfortable, lived-in patina of a happy life. Through Tiffany's dismissive gaze, it became small, dated, and hopelessly middle class. "Oh, this is cute," she said, stepping into the living room, her eyes sweeping over the polished hardwood floors, the worn Persian rug, the shelves overflowing with books. The word cute was wielded like a weapon. A verbal pat on the head for a well-meaning but hopelessly out-of-touch effort. It's very vintage. I smiled, a tight, polite stretching of my lips. We've lived here for 30 years. I suppose that makes it vintage. Andre, who had once loved the stories behind every piece of furniture, now looked uncomfortable. He shifted his weight from foot to foot, a nervous energy radiating from him. Mama, we were thinking of going to the mall. Of course, honey, I said. Just let me get you some snacks for the road. As I went to the kitchen, I overheard Tiffany's stage whisper, a sound designed to be heard. Does your mom ever buy anything new? She asked Andre. This whole house feels like a museum. It's not that bad, Andre mumbled, but his defense was weak, diluted by his own burgeoning shame. That was the beginning. Our home, once his haven, became a source of embarrassment. He stopped bringing friends over. His conversations, once filled with talk of books, ideas, and his classes, now revolved around brand names I had never heard of and a desperate, clawing desire for things. He wanted a new car not because the Honda wasn't reliable but because it wasn't a Lexus. He wanted new clothes not because his were worn, but because they didn't have the right logo stitched on the chest. He had become a curator of a new kind of collection, one based on surface and status, and he had learned his new aesthetic from Tiffany. She was the whisper in his ear, the constant dripping poison of comparison. Her life, as she presented it, was a seamless montage of luxury vacations, designer shopping sprees, and effortless consumption. She framed my life of careful, deliberate saving not as a virtue or even as a necessity, but as a personal failing, a lack of ambition. And worse, she began to frame it as a cage that was holding Andre back from his rightful place in her glittering world. I tried gently at first to push back. Andre, I said one afternoon, after he had spent 30 minutes complaining about his ancient laptop. You know, there's a difference between what you want and what you need. Your father and I, we always believed in living below our means so we could build something for the future. He looked at me, his face clouded with a sullen impatience I had never seen before. That's the problem, Mama, he said, his voice sharp. You're always thinking about the future. My life is happening now. Tiffany's parents, they help her live her life now. The implication was clear. I was not helping. I was hindering. The 20 years of sacrifice, the cathedral I had built for him brick by brick, was invisible to him. He could not see the structure, only the scaffolding of my frugality that surrounded it. And he was beginning to resent the scaffolding, to see it as a prison wall. The boy who had once cherished the stories of the past was now utterly captivated by a future that looked like a page from a luxury magazine, and he was starting to believe that I was the one thing standing in his way. The corruption was nearly complete. The vibrant, curious boy I had raised was fading, and a pale, resentful copy was taking his place. The invitation, when it came, was not delivered with warmth. It was presented as a decree. It was a Tuesday evening and I was in the kitchen washing the last of the dinner dishes. Andre and Tiffany had been out and they breezed in, bringing with them a chill of expensive air from the Buckhead shops. Andre didn't offer to help, he had long since stopped. He leaned against the counter, a posture of casual ownership that was new and unsettling, while Tiffany examined her manicure. So we have some amazing news, Andre announced, though his tone lacked any real excitement. It was the rehearsed speech of a press secretary. I got my early acceptance letter from Emory today. A genuine, unreserved wave of joy washed over me. I turned, drying my hands on a dish towel, a wide smile breaking across my face. Oh, Andre. That's wonderful. That's absolutely wonderful news. Your father would be so proud. Emory had been David's dream for him. It was close to home, a fine institution. This was it. This was the moment the cathedral was built for. Yeah, it's great, he said, his eyes flicking towards Tiffany as if for approval. Tiffany looked up from her nails, bestowing upon me a smile that didn't reach her cold, calculating eyes. It's a good starter school, she said, a masterpiece of condescension. My dad says the connections you make at their business school are decent. The joy in my heart flickered, but I refused to let her extinguish it. Well, it's a reason to celebrate, I said brightly. We should have a special dinner this weekend. I can make your favorite lasagna. Actually, Andre cut in, that's the other thing. Tiff and I, we think we should go out. To celebrate properly. A real celebration, Tiffany added, her voice smooth as silk. We've already booked a table for Saturday night. At Chops. Chops. The name landed in my kitchen like a dropped stone. It was one of those legendary Buckhead steak houses, a place where a single steak cost more than my weekly grocery budget. It was a symbol of a world so far removed from my own, it might as well have been on another planet. It was not a place for a quiet family celebration. It was a place for performance, for demonstrating status, for closing deals. I understood immediately. This was not an invitation. It was a summons. It was a test. They were taking me out of my element, my comfortable, book-lined home in Cascade Heights, and bringing me into theirs. They wanted to see if I could perform, if I could fit into the backdrop of the life they envisioned for themselves. It was a deliberate, calculated act of social engineering. "Oh," I said, my voice quiet. "That's a very expensive place, Andre." "Don't worry about it, Mama," he said with a dismissive wave of his hand. "It's my celebration. I'll take care of it." The words were meant to sound generous, but we all knew the truth. He had no money. The money he was planning to use was mine, drawn from the household account I funded, money that was supposed to be for groceries and utilities, not for $300 dinners. Or worse, he expected me to pay to foot the bill for my own ritualistic vetting. A part of me, the weary, sensible part, wanted to refuse. I wanted to say, "No, that's ridiculous. We can celebrate perfectly well right here." But I looked at my son's face, at the mixture of defiance and a strange, pleading hope in his eyes. He wanted this. He needed this validation, this performance. And I thought, perhaps foolishly, that if I went along with it, if I showed him that I could fit into his new world, it might bridge the growing chasm between us. If I could pass their test, maybe I could get my son back. "All right then," I said, forcing a smile that felt like a grimace. "Saturday night it is." "It sounds lovely." "Great," Tiffany said, her victory complete. "It's at 8. Try to be ready on time." The implication, of course, was that I was usually late, a doddering old woman who couldn't manage a simple schedule. For the rest of the week, a quiet dread settled in my heart. I approached the coming dinner with the meticulous preparation of an archivist preparing a fragile document for public display. This was not a meal, it was an exhibition, and I was the primary artifact. My wardrobe, a collection of perfectly serviceable but deeply unfashionable clothes, presented a problem. Nothing I owned felt appropriate for a place like Chops. I spent a lunch hour at a department store, the bright lights and loud music an assault on my senses, and bought a simple, elegant black dress. It was more money than I had spent on clothes for myself in 5 years, and the purchase felt like a surrender, a concession to their values. On Saturday evening, as I stood before the mirror in my bedroom, I barely recognized the woman looking back at me. The black dress was flattering, I supposed. I had put on a string of pearls my David had given me for our 10th anniversary. I had even attempted to style my hair in a way that felt more modern. But my eyes gave me away. They were the eyes of a woman heading not to a celebration but to an inquest. I was not going to dinner with my son. I was going to a formal review of my own relevance, and I knew with a sinking certainty that I was going to be found wanting. The foundation I had built for him was no longer enough. He wanted a new one, a shinier one, and he was about to ask me to demolish my own to make room for it. The valet at Chops was the first gatekeeper. He was a young man, no older than Andre, but he had the weary, judgmental eyes of someone who had seen it all and was impressed by none of it. When we pulled up in my 15-year-old Honda, nestled between a gleaming black Range Rover and a low-slung Porsche, his polite smile tightened into a mask of professional tolerance. He took my keys as if he were handling a contaminated object. Andre, to his credit, had the grace to look embarrassed, but Tiffany was mortified. She practically leaped from the car, striding towards the restaurant's heavy wooden doors without a backward glance, as if she could outrun the shame of our arrival. The interior of the restaurant was a symphony of masculine clichés. It was all dark wood, dim lighting, and the self-satisfied murmur of money. The air was thick with the smell of seared meat and expensive cologne. Men in tailored suits laughed too loudly, their wrists flashing with watches that cost more than my car. Women with surgically smooth faces and dresses that shimmered like fish scales picked at their food, their gazes constantly scanning the room, assessing, comparing, competing. It was not a place of rest or nourishment. It was a theater of status, and we were late for the curtain call. The hostess, a statuesque woman who looked like she had been carved from ice, led us to a red leather booth in the center of the bustling room. It was a prime location, a table for being seen. I understood that Tiffany had likely requested it specifically. We were on display. Isn't this fabulous? Tiffany breathed, sliding into the booth. She was in her element. She preened, she adjusted the straps of her tiny, expensive dress. She waved at a couple across the room. She was the star of a show, and Andre and I were her supporting cast. Andre, caught in the tractor beam of her excitement, nodded eagerly. It's amazing, Tiff. Really? He was performing too, playing the part of the sophisticated young man who belonged in such a place. He fumbled with the heavy leather-bound menu, his brow furrowed in concentration as if he were studying for an exam. The dinner was a masterclass in passive aggression, and Tiffany was its professor emeritus. Every comment, every question she directed at me was a carefully calibrated dart, designed to highlight my otherness, my lack of sophistication. When the sommelier, a man with a silver chain around his neck, came to the table, Tiffany took charge. "We'll have a bottle of the Camus," she announced, not even glancing at the wine list. "The 2018. She then turned to me, a look of faux concern on her face. "I hope you like Cabernet, Vivian. It's a big wine. Very bold." The unspoken question hung in the air. "Can you handle it? Or is your palate only accustomed to sweet tea?" "That will be fine, thank you," I said, my voice even. The conversation, steered by Tiffany, was a relentless monologue about wealth. She talked about her family's upcoming ski trip to Aspen. She talked about the new Tesla her father had just bought her for an early graduation present. She talked about the renovations they were planning for their summer home on Lake Lanier. Each story was a brick in the wall she was building between us, a wall made of money and access and a casual, thoughtless consumption that I found obscene. Andre, my son, my once thoughtful boy, was her eager accomplice. He listened with rapt attention, his eyes shining. He was desperate to prove that he belonged on her side of the wall. He began to pepper his own speech with the language of her world. He talked about leveraging his Emory degree and monetizing his passions. He used words like optics and branding to describe his own life. He was speaking a foreign language, a dialect of ambition and commerce that he had learned from her. I tried to steer the conversation back to familiar ground, to the boy I knew. "So, Andre, have you thought about what you might want to major in? Your father always thought you had a real gift for history." He flinched as if the word history was an accusation. "God, no, Mama," he said with a short, sharp laugh. "There's no money in history. Tiff's dad says I should go straight into finance. That's where the real opportunities are." "Your son is a pragmatist, Vivian," Tiffany chimed in, patting Andre's hand. "He's not going to waste his time on a lot of useless, dusty old subjects." The insult to my life's work was so direct, so breathtaking in its casual cruelty, that I was momentarily stunned into silence. 35 years I had spent in the service of those useless, dusty old subjects. 35 years dedicated to the idea that the past was not a waste of time, but the very ground upon which a meaningful future could be built. And my own son was dismissing it all with a laugh, eager to please a girl whose deepest thoughts probably revolved around which Instagram filter to use. The food arrived, a grotesque pageant of excess. My steak was a slab of meat the size of a paving stone, sitting alone on a vast white plate. The side dishes we had ordered, creamed spinach, truffle-laced macaroni and cheese, came in separate bowls and cost $30 apiece. I looked at the meal, at the sheer, unapologetic waste of it all, and I felt a profound sense of dislocation. This was not a celebration. It was a ritual sacrifice, and what was being sacrificed was every value I had ever held dear, every lesson I had ever tried to teach my son. He was trading the rich, complex legacy of his father and me for this. A shallow, expensive performance in a room full of strangers. The first Andre was gone. He had been fully and completely replaced by this new hollow version. And the final, fatal blow was yet to come. The final act of the performance began, as it so often does, with a discussion of money. Not the quiet, careful and respectful discussion of money that had been the background hum of my entire adult life, but the loud, performative and deeply anxious discussion of money that defined Tiffany's world. She had been scrolling through her phone, a small, bored frown on her face, when she looked up and fixed her gaze on Andre. "Babe," she said, her voice carrying across the table with the clear, piercing tone of a public announcement. "I was just looking at the dorm options for Emory. The standard rooms are honestly tragic. Like cinder block walls. We absolutely have to get you into the upgraded suites at Longstreet means. They have private bathrooms and walk-in closets. Andre, who had just taken a large bite of his steak, swallowed hastily. Oh yeah. Are they much more expensive? I saw a flicker of the old Andre in that question. A brief moment of his ingrained, learned caution. Tiffany waved a dismissive hand, her diamond bracelet catching the dim light. Of course they're more expensive, silly. But it's a non-negotiable. It's about the experience. It's about your environment. My dad always says you have to spend money to be around money. She then turned her gaze to me, her expression a careful blend of sweetness and steel. You understand, right, Vivian? We can't have Andre living in some depressing little box. It would be bad for his morale. Bad for his brand. His brand. The word hung in the air between us, absurd and obscene. My son was not a product. He was a human being, a legacy of love and hope. But in their world he was a brand to be managed, an image to be curated. I chose my words carefully, keeping my voice low and even. Andre and I have a very healthy college fund set aside, I said. I'm sure it will be more than adequate to cover his tuition and his living expenses. Oh, I know, Tiffany said, her smile widening. Andre told me all about your little fund. It's very responsible of you. The word responsible was meant to sound like quaint. The word little was a deliberate, calculated jab, an attempt to diminish the single greatest financial achievement of my life. Andre shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He could feel the tension, the unspoken conflict, and as always, he sought the path of least resistance. He sought to appease Tiffany. What Tiff is saying, Mama, is that we need to think bigger. The fund is great for tuition, obviously. But there's so much more to the college experience. There are the clubs you join, the spring break trips, the clothes you wear. It's all part of the networking. We can't be thinking small. I have never thought small when it comes to your future, Andre, I said, and for the first time, a sliver of ice entered my voice. I have thought of nothing else for 20 years. He heard it. He heard the shift. And it panicked him. He looked from my face, which I am sure was a mask of cold disappointment, to Tiffany's, which was a mask of expectant triumph. He was caught between two worlds and he had to make a choice. In that moment, with the pressure of the opulent room and the weight of his girlfriend's ambition upon him, he chose. He chose wrong. He took a deep breath, puffed out his chest, and put on the face of a man making a difficult but necessary business decision. He was no longer my son. He was a junior executive, a deal maker, a man of the world as defined by the girl sitting next to him. He looked directly at me, his eyes holding mine with a chilling, unfamiliar hardness. Look, Mama, he said, his voice loud enough for the neighboring tables to hear. I appreciate everything you've done. I really do. But we're in a different league now. Things are going to be different. And I just wish I didn't have to carry my biggest burden with me into this next chapter. My biggest burden. The words did not land like a slap. A slap is hot and sudden. This was different. This was the slow, silent, and absolute impact of a glacier. The sound in the restaurant, the clinking of glasses, the murmur of conversation, the distant sizzle from the kitchen. All of it faded into a profound and total silence in my own head. There was only the ringing of those three words. My biggest burden. The 20 years of sacrifice. The patched roof. The worn-out coat. The overtime shifts. The thousands of quiet, solitary choices made in the name of his future. The promise I made to his dying father. All of it, every brick of the cathedral, every prayer, every hope, was not a foundation. It was not a gift. It was a burden. A thing to be carried with resentment, to be shed with relief. I did not cry. I did not scream. I did not protest. The part of me that would have done those things, the mother, simply ceased to exist in that moment. She vanished. She turned to dust. And in her place something else rose up. Something cold and clear and terribly, terribly calm. It was the archivist. And the archivist knew exactly what to do when a collection had been irrevocably compromised. Time in that moment fractured. There was the time of the restaurant where waiters continued to move and people continued to laugh, oblivious. And then there was the time in my head, which had slowed to a thick, syrupy crawl. I saw everything with a preternatural clarity, the way an archivist examines a document under a magnifying glass, noting every flaw, every watermark, every tear in the fiber. I saw the triumphant, predatory gleam in Tiffany's eyes. She had won. She had pushed him to this, and he had performed exactly as she'd hoped. She had successfully engineered the final public severing of his ties to his old life, to me. She was looking at me with a kind of pitying contempt, the look of a victor. I saw my son Andre. I saw the brief, flickering panic on his face as the words left his mouth, the dawning horror of what he had just said. But it was immediately suppressed, pushed down and replaced by a stubborn, defensive pride. He had committed to his choice and he would not back down now. He squared his shoulders, lifting his chin in a pantomime of strength, a boy playing dress-up in his father's suit and finding it several sizes too large. He had mistaken cruelty for power, and the mistake would define the rest of his life. And I saw myself, or rather the woman who had been me, the mother. I saw her as a separate entity, a ghost at the table. I saw her 20 years of relentless, hopeful, loving sacrifice, not as a source of strength, but as a fatal flaw, a vulnerability that had been exploited to its breaking point. She had believed that unconditional love was a shield. She had learned in that instant that it could also be a target. And so she did the only thing she could do. She let go. She dissipated like smoke, leaving behind only the cold, hard, and indestructible core of my being. The archivist took her place. The archivist does not operate on emotion. The archivist operates on fact, on assessment, and on procedure. The emotional, subjective value of an item is irrelevant in the face of its condition. The facts were these. The collection, titled Andre's Future, had been built with the finest materials of love, sacrifice, and hope. It had been curated with meticulous, professional care for 2 decades. Its purpose was to serve as a foundation for a new, independent legacy. The assessment was this. The primary beneficiary of the collection had, through a single catastrophic act of willful negligence, rendered the collection's purpose moot. He had not only rejected the foundation, he had declared it a liability. The structural integrity of the entire project was compromised. To continue to maintain it would be an act of professional malpractice. The procedure was clear. Deaccession. A cold, clean, and utterly liberating calm washed over me. The hurt was gone. The anger was gone. The love, that vast and heavy cathedral of love, was gone. In its place was a simple, quiet, and absolute resolve. The transaction was over. The account was closed. I picked up my wine glass. The bold, expensive Cabernet that Tiffany had chosen felt thin and tasteless on my tongue. I took a small, deliberate sip. I placed the glass back on the white linen tablecloth with a soft, definitive click. Then I smiled. It was not a smile of warmth or forgiveness. It was not the pained, brave smile of a wounded mother. It was the small, neutral, and deeply unnerving smile of a person who holds all the cards and has just decided to end the game. It was a smile of pure, unadulterated power. I saw the confusion on their faces. They had expected tears. They had expected a scene. They had expected a dramatic emotional reaction that they could then frame as hysteria, as me being unreasonable, as further proof of my status as a burden. My calm, my smile was not in their script. It threw them completely off balance. Well, I said, my voice as smooth and cool as polished stone. It is good to know where one stands. I folded my napkin and placed it neatly on the table beside my plate of barely touched, obscenely expensive steak. I reached down and picked up my handbag. I slid out of the red leather booth, my movements fluid and unhurried. Andre's face was a mess of confusion. Mama? Where are you going? I'm going home, Andre, I said, looking down at him. I was no longer looking at my son. I was looking at a historical artifact, a case study in misplaced ambition. Thank you for the clarification. It was very illuminating. I turned to Tiffany. It was a pleasure to finally understand you, Tiffany, I said. The smile did not leave my face. You've been very educational. I turned and walked away from the table. I did not look back. I could feel their eyes on me, 2 pairs of them, burning with a mixture of shock, confusion, and a dawning, terrible fear. I had not played my part. I had walked off the stage and I had taken the entire set with me. As I walked through the crowded, noisy restaurant, the sounds began to filter back in. The laughter, the clinking glasses. But it was just noise now. It had no power over me. I felt light. I felt free. The weight of the 20-year promise, The heavy mantle of sacrifice had been lifted from my shoulders. It had not been lifted by my son's success as I had always imagined it would be. It had been blasted away by his cruelty. And in the empty space it left behind there was not a void. There was a quiet, thrilling and limitless expanse of possibility. My possibility. I stepped out of the restaurant's heavy doors and into the cool Atlanta night. I handed the valet my ticket. I did not care that he brought me my old humble Honda. It was my car. It was paid for. It was mine. As I drove away from the glittering false world of Buckhead and back towards the quiet, solid reality of my own home, I knew what I had to do. The archivist had made her assessment. Now it was time to file the paperwork. I slept that night. It was a deep, dreamless and profoundly restful sleep, the kind I hadn't had in years. The sleep of a soldier after the war has been lost, and the burden of fighting is finally over. I woke to the familiar comfort of my own sun-drenched bedroom, the quiet hum of life in Cascade Heights, a gentle counterpoint to the storm that had broken the night before. There was no grief. There was no agonizing replay of the scene. There was only the quiet, efficient hum of purpose. The archivist was at work. I made myself a cup of tea, the strong black kind I liked, and sat on my back porch, looking out at the garden I had cultivated with my own 2 hands. The tomato plants were heavy with fruit. The zinnias stood tall and bright in the morning sun. This was real. This was mine. It was a small kingdom, but its foundations were solid, built on my own labor and love. The thought was clarifying. Before I could allow any second-guessing, any lingering sentimentality to cloud my judgment, I knew I needed to make the first call. I needed an ally who would not offer platitudes or urge reconciliation. I needed a witness for the prosecution. I needed my sister, Denise. Denise was my opposite in almost every way. Where I was quiet, she was loud. Where I was cautious, she was bold. She was a successful real estate agent who had built her business from the ground up. A woman who understood value, contracts, and the hard, unsentimental reality of a bottom line. She had always been critical of what she called my endless Andre project, seeing my sacrifice not as noble, but as a dangerous overinvestment in a volatile asset. She answered on the second ring, her voice a cheerful, booming, "Hey Viv. What's the good word?" I did not waste time with pleasantries. I recounted the events of the previous evening with the detached, factual precision of an archivist writing an incident report. I told her about the restaurant, the conversation, Tiffany's provocations. And then I told her the exact words Andre had used. My biggest burden. The silence on the other end of the line was not the silence of shock. It was the silence of a gathering storm. I could almost hear her absorbing the information, processing it, and her formidable anger building to a flashpoint. That little, ungrateful piece of... She let out a long, slow breath, a sound like a deflating tire. "Hey Vivian. I'm coming over. I'm getting in my car right now. And on the way, I'm going to call that boy and give him a piece of my mind that will strip the paint off his bedroom walls." "No," I said, my voice calm and firm. It stopped her cold. "No, Dee. Do not call him. Do not confront him. That is not the plan." "What plan?" she demanded. "The plan is to set that child straight. The plan is to remind him where he came from and who paid for the very food he was eating when he insulted you." "That was the old plan," I said. "That plan was based on the assumption that the asset was worth saving. It's not. The new plan is containment and liquidation." Denise was silent again, but this time it was a different kind of silence. It was the sound of her sharp, strategic mind catching up with me, of her recognizing the shift in my voice from wounded sister to determined adversary. "Oh," she said, a slow smile spreading through her voice. "Oh, I see. The worm has turned. And she has come out of the ground with a calculator and a spine of steel. I like this new Vivian." "There's nothing new about me, Dee," I said. "This part was just dormant. I need your help. Not to yell at him. I need your clear head." "You've got it," she said, her voice all business now. "So what's the first step, General? What are your orders?" The validation in her voice was like a steel rod being inserted into my spine. I was not overreacting. I was not being a dramatic, emotional woman. I was being a rational actor responding to a fundamental breach of contract. "The first step," I said, looking out at my garden, "is to accept the facts. The Andre I raised is gone. He has been replaced by a cheap imitation who is wholly owned by that girl and her family. To continue to fund that entity would be an act of insanity. Hallelujah and amen, Denise muttered. I've been telling you that for a year. I know you have, I said. I wasn't ready to listen. I am now. The second step is to understand that any further communication with him is pointless. He will apologize, he will make excuses, he will try to manipulate the situation. He will deploy 20 years of learned behavior to get what he wants. The door for that is now closed and bolted. Good, she said. So you're cutting him off emotionally. What about financially? This was the heart of it. This was where I needed her righteous anger to fuel my resolve. That's the main project, I said. The Andre Du Bois Collegiate Trust is officially dissolved, effective last night. Its assets are to be repurposed. I heard a sharp intake of breath, followed by a low whistle. Vivian Du Bois. You're my hero. Repurposed for what? Repurposed for the benefit of the original investor, I said. I am cashing out. I am taking my 20 years of sacrifice, of compound interest, of life deferred, and I am giving it back to myself. A loud, joyous whoop erupted from the phone. Yes. Denise shouted. Yes. It's a jubilee. It's an emancipation. It's a retirement party. Oh, Viv, this is the best news I've heard in a decade. Her joy was so pure, so fierce, it blew away the last lingering cobwebs of doubt in my mind. So what do we do? She asked, her voice eager. How do we make it happen? That, I said, a plan beginning to form with crystalline clarity, is the next phone call. But I needed to call you first. I needed to know I wasn't crazy. Crazy, she said, her voice dropping into a tone of deep protective seriousness. Vivian, listen to me. You are the sanest person in this equation. You built a palace for that boy and he complained it wasn't big enough. That's not on you. That's on him. The bank is closed, Viv. The doors are locked. It's time to foreclose on the whole damn property. The bank is closed. The metaphor was perfect. It was exactly how I felt. The institution of my motherhood, which had offered unlimited, interest-free emotional and financial credit for 21 years, was now officially insolvent. And it was time to call in the receivers. With Denise's voice still echoing in my ear, a chorus of righteous fury and unwavering support, I knew the moment for emotional validation was over. The time for strategic action had arrived. My next call would not be to a sister who would soothe my soul, but to a cousin who would guard my assets. I needed to move from the war room to the boardroom. I needed Nia Brooks. Nia was my mother's sister's daughter, a woman I had bounced on my knee at family cookouts, who had grown into one of Atlanta's most respected and shrewd financial planners. She operated out of a sleek office in a downtown skyscraper, a world of glass and steel that was as far removed from my dusty archives as one could imagine. Nia was brilliant not just with numbers but with people. She understood that money was never just about money. It was about power, security, fear, and freedom. She was the one who had helped me set up the trust for Andre all those years ago, her professional expertise tempered with a deep familial understanding of my goals. She had been the architect of the cathedral. Now I was going to ask her to be its demolition expert. I dialed her direct line, a number she had given me years ago for emergencies. I supposed this qualified. Her assistant answered, a young man with a crisp, professional voice. Nia Brooks' office, this is Marcus speaking. Marcus, hello. This is Vivian Du Bois. I'm Nia's cousin. I need to speak with her, please. It's a matter of some urgency. Of course, Miss Du Bois. I'm afraid she's in a meeting with a client at the moment. Can I take a message or schedule a call for later this afternoon? I need to see her, I said, my voice leaving no room for negotiation. In person. As soon as possible. Today if she has any time at all. My tone must have conveyed the seriousness of the situation. There was a brief pause, the sound of a keyboard clicking. Miss Brooks does have a cancellation at 11 o'clock, Miss Du Bois. Would that work for you? I will be there, I said. Thank you, Marcus. I hung up the phone and looked at the clock. It was just after 9. I had less than 2 hours. I moved with the methodical purpose of an archivist preparing a collection for transfer. I went to my study, a small room lined with David's books, and opened the bottom drawer of my filing cabinet. Inside was a folder, thick and meticulously organized, labeled AD Collegiate Trust. For 20 years I had filed every quarterly statement, every trade confirmation, every piece of correspondence related to the fund. It was the complete, unassailable record of my sacrifice. I lifted the folder from the drawer. It felt heavy in my hands, heavy with the weight of years. I dressed carefully, not in the new, performative black dress from the night before, but in my own clothes, my professional armor. A simple, well-ironed silk blouse, a tailored pair of gray trousers, and the sensible, comfortable leather shoes that had carried me through countless days in the library archives. I was not going to this meeting as a victim. I was not going as a scorned mother. I was going as the primary investor, the chairman of the board of my own life, and I needed to look the part. The drive downtown was a journey from one world to another. I left the quiet, tree-lined streets of Cascade Heights, with its historic homes and sense of settled community, and merged onto the frantic, roaring artery of the downtown connector. The city rose up around me, a forest of glittering glass and concrete, a testament to ambition and commerce. It was Andre and Tiffany's world, a world that had always felt alien to me. But today I was not intimidated by it. I was heading into its heart to reclaim what was mine. Nia's office was on the 40th floor. The elevator ride was a smooth, silent, and rapid ascent that made my ears pop. I stepped out into a reception area that was a study in minimalist wealth. White orchids bloomed in a stark black vase. The art on the walls was abstract and expensive. The air smelled faintly of success. Marcus, the young assistant, greeted me with a polite, professional smile and offered me water. I declined. I sat in a firm leather chair and placed the thick folder on my lap. I did not fidget. I did not read the magazines on the table. I simply waited, my back straight, my hands resting on the complete and total record of my life's work. At precisely 11 o'clock, the door to Nia's office opened. She stood in the doorway, a vision of tailored competence in a sharp navy blue suit. Her hair was cut in a chic, no-nonsense bob, and her eyes, when they met mine, were as sharp and intelligent as I remembered. But they also held a flicker of concern. She saw something in my face, in my posture, that told her this was not a social call. "Vivian," she said, her voice a warm, deep alto. "Come in. It's so good to see you, but I get the feeling this isn't just to say hello." "No, Nia," I said, rising and walking towards her. "It isn't." I stepped into her office, a corner suite with a panoramic view of the Atlanta skyline. The city spread out below us, a vast and intricate map of human endeavor. It was a view that bespoke power, perspective. It was the perfect place for the conversation we were about to have. She closed the door behind us, shutting out the rest of the world. "What's happened?" she asked, her voice softening with familial care. "Is it Andre? Is he okay?" "He is fine," I said, walking to the client chairs that faced her large, uncluttered desk. "But the trust is not. The trust is compromised." I sat down and placed the folder on the polished surface of her desk. It landed with a soft, definitive thud, a sound that seemed to echo in the quiet room. "The Andre Dubois Collegiate Trust," I announced, my voice as clear and steady as a bell, "is being dissolved. I am here today to discuss the deaccession process. I need your help to liquidate the entire collection and transfer the assets. The beneficiary has changed." Nia stared at me, her professional composure momentarily cracking. She looked from my face, which I am sure was a mask of unyielding resolve, to the thick folder on her desk, the tangible evidence of 2 decades of my life. She sank into her high-backed leather chair, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock and a dawning, profound understanding. "Okay," she said, her voice a near whisper. "Vivian, tell me everything." The call to action was complete. The wheels of finance, of law, of consequence, were now officially in motion. I told her everything. Seated in the quiet, climate-controlled sanctuary of Nia's office, with the city of Atlanta sprawling beneath us like a conquered map, I laid out the facts. I spoke with the dispassionate clarity of an archivist presenting a condition report on a damaged artifact. I detailed the slow, corrosive influence of Tiffany King. I described the dinner at Chops, the performance of status, the calculated insults. And then I delivered the final, fatal blow, the 3 words that had changed everything. My biggest burden. As I spoke, I watched Nia's face transform. The initial shock gave way to a quiet, simmering fury. The familial concern in her eyes was overlaid with the cold, hard glint of a professional whose work had been desecrated. She had helped me build this trust. She understood better than anyone besides my sister, the scale of the sacrifice it represented. To her, this was not just a family drama. It was an assault on the very principles of stewardship and legacy that her entire career was built upon. She was not just my cousin. She was the custodian of the cathedral, and someone had just tried to burn it down. When I finished, she was silent for a long moment. She leaned forward, her elbows on her desk, and steepled her fingers, her sharp, intelligent eyes fixed on mine. She was no longer looking at me as a grieving widow or a doting mother. She was looking at me as a client, a powerful one, who had come to her with a problem that required a sophisticated, ruthless solution. "First of all, Vivian," she said, her voice low and tight with controlled anger, "I am so sorry. Not just that he said that, but that he is that person. That is a failure of character so profound it's staggering." "Thank you, Nia," I said. "But I am past the point of needing apologies or sympathy. I am here for a strategy." A slow, dangerous smile touched the corners of her lips. "Good," she said. "As I have several. Let's open the file." She pulled the thick folder towards her and opened it. For the next 20 minutes, she reviewed the documents, her eyes scanning the statements with the speed and precision of a machine. She was in her element, the world of numbers and clauses and legal structures. The air in the room crackled with her focused energy. "Okay," she said, finally looking up. "The structure is a standard revocable trust. You are the grantor and the trustee. Andre is the sole beneficiary. Legally, this is as simple as it gets. The assets are entirely within your control. We can liquidate the portfolio and have the funds transferred to your personal bank account within 3 business days." She paused, leaning back in her chair. "But that's the simple solution. That's the sledgehammer. It's effective, but it's not elegant. And given the nature of the offense, I feel this situation calls for a certain degree of elegance. We're not just trying to take the money back, Vivian. We are trying to make a statement. We are trying to build a fortress for your future so high and so impenetrable that he can never, ever touch it physically or emotionally again." This was why I had come to her. Denise had given me the righteous fire. Nia was giving me the tactical nuclear codes. "What do you have in mind?" I asked. "We're not just going to cash out," she said, a predatory gleam in her eye. That's what he would expect. A simple emotional reaction. Instead, we are going to perform a seamless, professional, and utterly irreversible institutional transfer. We are not going to destroy the trust. We are going to repurpose it. We are going to draft a new trust document. Today. Right now. She swiveled in her chair and typed a few commands into her computer. A printer in the corner of the room hummed to life. "The Andre Dubois Collegiate Trust," she announced, "is hereby terminated. In its place, we are establishing a new legal entity." She walked to the printer and retrieved a single warm sheet of paper. She slid it across the desk to me. At the top of the page, in bold, stark letters, were the words, "The Vivian Dubois Liberation Trust." I stared at the words, and for the first time since that horrible dinner, I felt a tremor of emotion. It was not sadness. It was a fierce, surging, and unfamiliar feeling of joy. Liberation. The word was perfect. It was everything. "The terms of this new trust," Nia continued, her voice a purr of strategic satisfaction, "will be slightly different. You will remain the grantor. However, you and I will be co-trustees. This adds a layer of legal protection and ensures that no one can ever pressure or manipulate you into making a decision against your own best interests. The sole beneficiary of this trust will be you, Vivian Dubois, for the duration of your natural life." She wasn't finished. "Furthermore," she said, leaning forward, "we will include a specific clause. A spendthrift clause to protect the assets from any future creditors, but more importantly an interim clause, also known as a no-contest clause. It will state that if any individual, named or unnamed, should ever attempt to legally challenge the validity of this trust or its terms, they will be automatically and permanently disinherited from any and all of your assets, both within this trust and in your general estate." It was a masterpiece. It was a financial and legal work of art. It was not just a shield, it was a minefield. It didn't just take the money away from Andre. It created a permanent, legally binding barrier between him and my future, my security, my peace. It was an act of profound and total self-preservation. "And the final piece," Nia said, her smile now wide and triumphant, "is the transfer itself. We will not liquidate the portfolio. There's no need to incur the capital gains tax. The market is strong and your investments are sound. We will simply execute a direct in-kind transfer of all assets from the old trust to the new one. To the outside world, to the banks, to the clearinghouses, it will look like a simple administrative name change. It's quiet. It's clean. It's utterly ruthless. She had weaponized finance. She had taken the very tools of the world that Andre and Tiffany so admired, the legal structures, the financial instruments, the cold, hard language of contracts, and she had turned them into an arsenal for my defense. She had built me a fortress out of the very stones they had been throwing at me. "So," she said, her eyes sparkling with the thrill of the fight. "What do you say, Vivian? Are you ready to liberate yourself?" I looked from her fierce, smiling face to the document on the desk. The Vivian Dubois Liberation Trust. It was more than a legal entity. It was a declaration of independence. It was the title of the next chapter of my life. "Yes, Nia," I said, my voice ringing with a clarity and strength I hadn't heard in years. "Let's get to work." The hours that followed were a blur of focused, quiet, and deeply satisfying activity. Nia's office, that high-tech fortress in the sky, became my command center. She moved with an efficiency that was breathtaking to watch. She summoned a paralegal, a young woman with sharp eyes and an even sharper mind, who began drafting the new trust documents with a speed and precision that spoke of years of experience. While the paralegal typed, Nia and I worked on the asset transfer. There was no dramatic, cinematic scene of shredding old documents or deleting files. The execution of my liberation was, fittingly, a bureaucratic process. It was a matter of forms, signatures, and precise, legal language. It was a quiet, paper-based revolution. Nia put me on a conference call with a representative from the investment firm that held the trust. She handled the entire conversation, her voice a smooth, confident instrument of power. "Good morning, Charles," she'd said. "Nia Brooks calling on behalf of my client Vivian Dubois. We are restructuring the trust account, number 74B291. We'll be executing an in-kind asset transfer to a new trust entity. I'm sending the signed authorization forms over via secure e-courier now. Please process them on an expedited basis." There was no pushback. There were no questions about why. To Charles at the investment firm, I was not a heartbroken mother. I was an account number, a client, and my authorized financial planner was giving him a directive. The world that had seemed so intimidating and alien to me just days before was now working for me, its gears and levers being expertly manipulated by my cousin. While we waited for the paralegal to finalize the paperwork, Nia walked me through the numbers. She projected the trust's balance onto a large screen on her wall. Seeing the number there in stark white digits against a blue background was staggering. It was a testament to 20 years of discipline. It was the ghost of a million small sacrifices, all gathered together into a formidable, powerful whole. "This is your life's work, Vivian," Nia said softly, looking at the screen. "Not Andre. This is the tangible result of your strength and your foresight. And now it's going to work for you." She began to show me what that meant. She ran projections, created charts. She showed me how the interest and dividends alone could provide me with a comfortable monthly income without ever touching the principal. She showed me how I could afford to retire tomorrow if I wanted to. She showed me the cost of a round-the-world cruise, of a small cottage on the coast, of a lifetime of financial security. He was not just showing me numbers. He was showing me my future. A future I had never, in all my years of saving, allowed myself to imagine. My vision of the future had always been inextricably linked with Andre's. I would be the quiet, supportive grandmother, living simply, my duty done. I had never envisioned a future that was solely, gloriously, my own. Nia was handing me the blueprint for that future, a future of travel, of leisure, of freedom from financial worry. A future I had earned 10 times over. By early afternoon, the documents were ready. The paralegal brought in a handsome leather-bound portfolio. Inside were 2 sets of documents. The first was a single page, the official dissolution of the Andre Dubois Collegiate Trust. The second was a thick, multi-page document, the establishment of the Vivian Dubois Liberation Trust. Nia laid them out on her desk. She handed me a heavy, expensive-feeling pen. "This is it, Viv," she said, her voice gentle. "The DX session." I picked up the pen. I looked at the first document. My hand trembled just for a moment. This was the final act. This was the severing. It was one thing to feel it, to decide it. It was another to codify it in ink to make it a legal and irreversible fact. I thought of David, of my promise to him. A pang of guilt, the last ghost of the mother I had been, whispered in my ear. You're breaking your promise. And then a new voice, my own, answered it. No. The promise was to give him a foundation. I did that. He chose to reject it. The promise was not to set myself on fire to keep him warm. I took a deep breath. My hand was steady now. With a smooth, deliberate stroke I signed my name. Vivian Dubois. It was done. The cathedral was gone. Then I turned to the second document. The Liberation Trust. I signed my name again on every line that required it. With each signature I felt a weight lifting. The weight of 20 years of obligation. The weight of my son's ingratitude. The weight of being a burden. Each stroke of the pen was a step towards the light. I was not just signing a legal document. I was signing my own emancipation proclamation. When I had finished, I put the pen down. The silence in the room was profound. It was the silence of a great momentous thing having been completed. Nia gathered the documents, her movements crisp and efficient. I will have these filed with the court and delivered to the investment firm by the end of the day, she said. By market close tomorrow the transfer will be complete. The Vivian Dubois Liberation Trust will be the sole owner of all assets. She stood up and came around the desk. She put her hands on my shoulders, and for the first time that day she was not my financial planner. She was my cousin, my family. You did the right thing, Vivian, she said, her voice thick with emotion. You did the brave thing. I stood up and hugged her, a fierce, grateful embrace. Thank you, Nia, I whispered. Thank you for helping me find my way back to myself. I walked out of her office, out of the skyscraper, and back into the sunlight of the city. But the city did not feel alien to me anymore. It felt like a place of possibility. I had walked into that building a burden. I walked out a free woman. The quiet, bureaucratic revolution was over. All that remained was to inform the deposed king that his reign had ended. The weeks that followed were the quietest and most peaceful of my adult life. The house, once a place of simmering tension and unspoken resentment, became my sanctuary again. I moved through my days with a newfound sense of lightness and purpose. I spent hours in my garden, not out of necessity but for the sheer joy of it. I reread some of David's favorite books, his notes in the margins like conversations from beyond the grave. I reconnected with old friends from the library, joining them for long lunches where I ordered whatever I wanted without a flicker of financial guilt. I was rediscovering Vivian Dubois. I was finding that I liked her very much. Andre, as I had predicted to Denise, attempted to make contact. There was a series of text messages, starting with a single confused, "Mama?" followed by a string of increasingly panicked, "Please call me, and we need to talk." I did not respond. I deleted them without reading them. The door was closed. Then came the voicemail messages. The first one was petulant. "Mama, I don't know why you're being so dramatic. It was a dinner. I said I was sorry. Call me back." The second was pleading. "Hey, look, I know what I said was stupid. I was just trying to impress Tiff. I didn't mean it. Please, Mama, I need to talk to you about the Emory tuition deposit." The third was a masterpiece of manipulative guilt. "I can't believe you're doing this to me. After everything. You're going to ruin my future because I said one dumb thing? Is that what this is about?" I listened to them with the detached interest of a researcher studying a foreign dialect. The boy on the recordings was a stranger to me. His words had no power. They were stones being thrown against the impenetrable walls of my new fortress. The inevitable confrontation came on a bright Saturday afternoon 3 weeks after the dinner. I was on my knees in the front yard, weeding my flower beds, when a sleek black Tesla I had never seen before pulled up to the curb. It was Tiffany's early graduation present. She was in the passenger seat, staring straight ahead, refusing to even look at my house. Andre got out of the driver's side. He was dressed in expensive, casual clothes that looked like they belonged on a yacht. He walked up the stone path to where I was kneeling, a manila folder in his hand. He looked tired and strained. The easy arrogance he had worn at the steakhouse was gone, replaced by a nervous, resentful anxiety. "Mama," he said, his voice tight. I did not stand up. I remained on my knees, a trowel in my hand, looking up at him. I was the one on the ground, but I was the one with all the power. The dynamic was unmistakable. "Andre," I said, my voice neutral. "I've been trying to call you, he said, stating the obvious. I've been busy, I replied and went back to pulling a stubborn weed. His face flushed with anger. Busy? I have my acceptance packet from Emory. The first tuition payment is due in 2 weeks. I need you to call the investment firm. I need you to authorize the transfer. He thrust the manila folder at me. I ignored it. I finished pulling the weed, shook the dirt from its roots and placed it in my bucket. I looked back up at him, my eyes unblinking. There is nothing to authorize, Andre. What are you talking about? He asked, his voice rising. The trust fund. I need the money from the trust fund. There is no trust fund, I said, my voice as calm and quiet as the afternoon air. He stared at me, his mouth slightly agape. What? That's not funny, Mama. I'm not laughing, I said. I slowly got to my feet, brushing the dirt from my knees. I walked past him, up the steps to my front porch where the mail had been delivered. I picked up the small stack of letters. Among them was a single, crisp, white envelope from the investment firm. It was addressed to the Vivian Dubois Liberation Trust. I had been waiting for it. I walked back down the steps and stood in front of my son. He was still standing there, frozen, the manila folder hanging limply from his hand. I calmly opened the envelope and pulled out the single sheet of paper inside. It was the first official statement of account for my new trust. I held it out to him. You are correct, I said. There was a trust fund. The Andre Dubois Collegiate Trust. It was dissolved 3 weeks ago. He took the paper from my hand, his fingers trembling. He stared at it. He saw the new name at the top. He saw the portfolio summary, the list of assets, the impressive total value. And then at the bottom he saw the line that read, Beneficiary, Vivian A. Dubois. The color drained from his face. He looked from the paper to me, his eyes wide with a dawning, catastrophic understanding. What is this? He whispered. Where's my name? Your name is not on it, I explained as if to a small child. This is my trust. The assets from your trust were transferred into it. You can't do that, he stammered. That's my money. No, Andre, I said, and my voice was as cold and hard as a diamond. It was never your money. It was my money. It was the money I earned over 35 years of work. It was the money I saved by not buying new cars or new coats or going on vacations. It was the money I guarded and grew as a promise to your father. It was a gift I was intending to give you. But one does not give a gift to someone who considers it a burden. I took the statement from his numb fingers. You told me I was your biggest burden. So I have done you the favor of unburdening you completely. You are free, Andre. You are entering your next chapter with no burdens at all. He just stared at me, his mind unable to process the sheer, absolute finality of it. He looked like a man who had been running a marathon, only to be told at the finish line that the prize had been given to someone else. But, college, he said, his voice a pathetic squeak. My future. Your future, I said, turning to walk back to my house, is now entirely your own responsibility. I suggest you and Tiffany and her father, the man with all the answers, figure it out. I walked up my steps and into my home. I closed the door behind me and for the first time I locked it. Through the window, I saw him standing on my lawn for a long time, the Emory acceptance packet in one hand and the ghost of a multi-$100,000 fortune in the other. He was finally, truly on his own. The statement had been delivered. The account was settled. The aftermath was not loud. The great defining acts of our lives rarely are. They are quiet, internal shifts that rearrange the furniture of our souls. The world does not stop. The sun continues to rise. But everything is different. In the weeks that followed my final conversation with Andre, a profound peace settled over me, the kind of peace that comes from a clean, well-ordered archive where every file is in its proper place. The file labeled Motherhood had been moved to a new folder, one titled History. It was a part of my past, a collection I could look back on with a complex mixture of love, pride, and a deep, abiding sorrow for what was lost. But it was no longer my present. It was no longer my future. My future was an empty, pristine, acid-free archival box, waiting to be filled. I retired. I walked into the library on a Monday morning, the place that had been my second home for 35 years, and I submitted my letter of resignation. My colleagues were shocked, but I explained with a simple, truthful smile that it was just time for a new chapter. They threw me a lovely party full of warm speeches and funny anecdotes, and presented me with a beautiful leather-bound journal. "For your own archives," the card read. The first thing I wrote in that journal was a list. It was not a list of chores or obligations. It was a list of desires. Things the old Vivian, the mother, the sacrificer, had never allowed herself to want. At the top of the list was one word: Paris. I called Denise. I said, "How do you feel about croissants?" 2 months later, we were sitting at a small wrought iron table at a cafe in Le Marais, the afternoon sun warming our faces. The air smelled of coffee and diesel and the ancient, elegant perfume of the city. I was drinking a glass of crisp, white Sancerre, a wine that cost more than I used to spend on a week's worth of lunches, and I felt no guilt. Only a deep, resonant pleasure. "To the Liberation Trust," Denise said, raising her glass. Her eyes were sparkling. "To liberation," I replied, clinking my glass against hers. We spent 2 weeks in France. We wandered through the Louvre, our footsteps echoing on the marble floors. I stood before the Mona Lisa, not with the hurried glance of a tourist, but with the slow, appreciative gaze of a fellow custodian of history. We took a train to the south, to the lavender fields of Provence, and I breathed in a fragrance so pure and overwhelming it felt like a form of prayer. I was not just seeing new places. I was meeting a new person. Myself. A woman who was interesting and adventurous and funny. A woman who was not defined by her relationship to anyone else. I did not hear from André. I learned through the quiet family grapevine that he had not gone to Emory. Tiffany's father, the man with all the connections, had apparently not been willing to foot the entire bill for a boy who had suddenly become a financial liability. The shiny new money world that had seemed so alluring had revealed its true nature. It was transactional. When André's value had plummeted, so had their interest. The last I heard, he was enrolled at a local community college and working part-time at one of Tiffany's father's car dealerships, changing oil and rotating tires. The relationship with Tiffany, predictably, had not survived the drastic downsizing of his future. There is a part of me, a small maternal ghost that sometimes whispers in the quiet of the night, that aches for the boy he was and for the man he might have been. That is a grief I will carry with me always. It is the archivist's lament for a precious document lost to fire. But that grief does not consume me. It is a single slim file in the vast and growing collection of my new life. My legacy, I have come to understand, is not the one I had planned. I had thought it would be my son, a successful, happy man standing on the foundation I had built for him. But we do not get to write the final chapters of other people's stories, not even our children's. The only legacy we can truly control is our own. My legacy will be the stamps in my passport. It will be the photos in my album of me and Denise, laughing in front of a Roman Colosseum, of me standing on a cliff overlooking the Irish Sea. It will be the small, perfect garden behind my quiet house in Cascade Heights. It will be the new wing of the archives at Clark Atlanta University, a project for which I have just anonymously endowed a significant grant, ensuring that the stories of our people will be preserved for generations to come. My name is Vivian Dubois. For 35 years I was a keeper of records. I have learned that the most important record you can keep, the most vital collection you can preserve, is your own life. You must protect it, curate it, and when necessary you must be willing to deaccession anything or anyone that threatens its integrity. You must be the archivist of your own soul.